So, hello and welcome to the latest edition of the AIM Search podcast, where I, your host, David Loader, and I'm lucky enough to sit down with founders of innovative technology companies and unpack their stories and uncover some of the successes and setbacks they've encountered along the way. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Dr. Finn Williams, the CEO and founder of MindPsy, the revolutionary platform that analyzes smartphone data to provide bespoke insights tailored towards improving mental health outcomes in young people. Dr. Williams, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Really good to have you on. And obviously, I'll give a super high-level overview of the platform. Please dive into the business a little bit more and tell the listeners about what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, so it's been an exciting few years in the research in this, but we are the first to translate the research that says we can use the smartphone raw sensor data to passively infer behavioural patterns that are most associated with our mental health. So whether that's your sleep patterns, how you move, how you have contact in person, social contact, and also your relationship to your phone. So that gives us an indication of how you manage those sort of periods of time, usually when we're waiting, of uncertainty, how you stay present moment. And what we do is we package that up and show it in beautiful data insights for the young person. And we work with partners, corporate partners and brand affiliates to help incentivize young people to make small behavioral changes to keep their mental health in balance. And for the chapters that we all go through, where sometimes it's harder to do that than others, we have a clinical AI support in the form of a AI avatar to give young people the opportunity to talk through what might be on their mind, what might be impacting those behaviours, and help get them back on track.
Wow, so much to unpack in that. And I think, first of all, really interested in how you're revolutionising the therapeutic care space when we look at quite traditional services, and particularly here in the UK. I know some of the audience will be elsewhere, but we hear about the NHS being so overrun, and person to person or human to human consultations are hard to get, particularly in the mental health side of things. So really interested to kind of dive into how you're leveraging technology to achieve that sort of therapeutic care at scale. Before we dive into that, really interested in understanding a little bit more about the demographic that you're specifically targeting. It's young people, and so dive into that sort of age range you're looking at, and why the focus on young people?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think young people are hugely underserved in this space. And what we know is that 75% of all adult mental health problems usually begin before the age of 24. So actually, not only are they hugely underserved in terms of our statutory kind of mental health budgets and the apps that are out there serving them, but also we know that adult mental health problems usually start in these kind of earlier years. So the opportunity to offer something that gets in and alongside young people right at the time that they're forming their sort of sense of self and self-esteem and self-compassion, which goes on to kind of informing that how they manage difficult situations, is hugely important to me. It's also my own kind of clinical background has always been with children and families.
And it'd be good to jump into your clinical background, because obviously you've come at this from that background in clinical practice. You haven't come from a technology background. So take us back a little bit further before you set up the business and talk about that clinical experience, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I've been working with children and families for over 20 years now, both in the NHS, but also through university academic research and commercial NHS as well. And it's been a kind of guiding why. My main principle and career has been formed around wanting to improve access to support for young people. And that comes from, as a teenager, had my own mental health struggles. I was really lucky to get early, good support, hugely transformative process for me, and it helped shape where I wanted to spend my career. So it has been always a kind of guiding ambition. I think before setting up MindPsy, I've always been a bit of an innovator within the areas that I've worked in. I've been kind of leading the digital transformation side of things within the NHS. I'm setting up services from scratch with early intervention practitioners in a digitally enabled kind of services, so where they can self-refer and where we can kind of manage a lot of that online with reduced friction. So not tech as in I've never been a coder, but always kind of mindful the accessibility that tech can bring for mental health.
Well, I appreciate that, and I really appreciate you sharing your personal story as well, the why behind the business. I think that's so powerful to understand. I love it when founders, do open up and share that. And I think it is interesting when you talk about that technical not maybe coming from a coding background, but leading those technical transformations and innovations within the NHS. I guess your clinical experience, you're really focused on that user experience side of things, and you mentioned reducing friction. Obviously the traditional routes are very, what's the opposite, have a lot of friction is what I'm trying to say. So I guess technology can help alleviate. Your approach, the MindPsy approach, is behavior based. Can we unpack that a little bit more, and why is a behavioral based approach the best approach in your opinion and according to the research for eliciting kind of behavior change, and particularly these young people you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the best approach, but I think it's the most observable. It's really hard. Like, none of us, not even psychologists, are mind readers. So in order for us to get a sense of the first point at which a young person's mental health might be affected, we look at behaviours, because that's tends to what happens. So for any of us going through difficult chapters in our lives or mental health struggles, the feelings about what's happening for us affect our behaviours, essentially. And so you will probably be able to identify with when you're stressed about something coming up, we don't sleep so well, right? And when we don't sleep so well, we don't feel as social. And when we don't feel as social, we don't go out as much. So all of those things we know are linked with our mental health. And it's the most observable, objectively observable opportunity for us to get that kind of really early intervention.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. And I think we've spoken before about nudging behaviors, and you mentioned removing friction as well. And I guess kind of comparing and contrasting with some more kind of traditional approaches. First of all, one of the things I loved with your digital approach and your, having the MindPsy platform is you're meeting users where they're at. The kind of age ranges you work with, 13 to 24, I believe the kind of the ages you work with. We're living in a digital age. Everyone's on their phones. The idea of to go and see a person, go and see a psychologist or go and see a doctor in person is incredibly anxiety provoking, and that's not where the users are at. And to properly understand their behavior, I guess, looking at the data you analyze from smartphones is probably gives the most holistic and complete overview of how to drive those behavior changes. Talk to me, please, or talk to the listeners about how further using the digital platform and using AI, you're able to offer the most kind of tailored and bespoke approaches to help the users.
So that's a good question and an involved one. So the behavioural aspects that we observe and we show back to the user creates what we call like a global user summary. And so in the back end of our tech, we're able to kind of get an inference kind of score on people's behaviors and how they're changing over time. That then gets fed into our kind of AI conversational side of things, and we're able to use that to help shape and adapt the AI conversation to be much more personalized as people move through. So it's kind of like that mentorship happens, starts and finishes with the observable behavior and creating a really good conversation in between.
Amazing. And in terms of reinforcement and reinforcing those positive behaviors, you mentioned before some of those kind of reinforcement learning or those rewards users get. Talk us through that component of the platform, if that's okay.
Yeah, so actually this is a relatively new kind of go-to-market strategy, I suppose, but it's recognizing that any of us at any time in our lives making behavioral changes is not easy, right? It's habit forming, and we try and do that with as least friction as possible. We want to sort of do tiny micro habits over time, but it's hard, and it's even harder when we're just not feeling. I always think motivation is a really interesting concept because it's the last thing that shows up when you really need it. So what we want to be able to do is bring together a community of brand and affiliate partners who really recognize and invest in youth mental wellness, essentially, and can offer our users opportunities, experiences, discounts on things that are valuable to them. So it might be that by keeping up with their friends and joining their friends in a bit of a quest to change their relationships to their phones, they're able to exchange the kind of currency they gain in app from that for a meal out at one of our kind of, one of their favorite kind of places to eat. And so not only does that help to incentivize that behavioral change, but it's the brand is making a point about giving young people experiences that bring them back together in communities. Everything is about sending the kind of message about how does everybody come together as a stakeholder in mental health and support these kind of changes.
I suppose and presume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I find the area of behavioural science and behaviour change fascinating. Presumably, given all the kind of the richness of the data you're getting and all the sources of data you're getting, in terms of setting new behaviours and anchoring behaviours onto, for example, if you've got one user that's cycles to school versus one that takes the bus, that they're already kind of on their bike, maybe getting them to engage in like a 15-20 minute extra cycle, taking a longer route back would be a good way of getting more physical activity in that young person. Maybe the person that's getting the bus getting off a stop or two early. I presume understanding and having this richness of data is, instead of giving a blanket, you should be exercising 150 minutes a week, which sounds like a lot to most people if you're not exercising, actually being able to provide bespoke, suggestions and nudges for people to, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, we're not trying to change your daily routine. These are some habits and easy things you can implement into your day-to-day routine based on the data and based on what we already know you're doing. Presumably that's going to remove a lot of friction and make it a lot easier to improve, those positive engagement with those positive behaviours in young people as well. Is that right? Or
Yeah, I think so. So like we're not there to sort of prescribe what people should be doing.
Yeah.
I think what's important is that we understand everybody's individual patterns, and recognize when that changes, because it's one of the aspects that the passive data gives us is the opportunity to provide that kind of just in time. So let's say, for instance, we're pretty habitual animals, right? So let's say you cycle to school 3 times a week and you catch the bus a couple of times. You normally cover about 8 to 10,000 steps a day. If that significantly changes alongside your sleep patterns changing and alongside your social contact changing, it gives us a sense to be able to go, okay, something has changed in your habits. Is there a cause to be concerned about that? And we're not assuming there is, but it gives us the opportunity to just nudge and go, everything okay? Do you want to have a chat about it? So it's the mechanism through which we can start to raise young people's awareness of how their activity change might be being driven by certain situations, and check in whether or not that's affecting their mood. They might say, actually, do you know what? No, I've got a different week this week. I'm on study leave. I'm not catching the bus. I'm not cycling. I'm a bit stressed. My sleep is therefore impacted. But that's completely normal. That would be completely normal.
And I guess all this information provides more, as well as providing more bespoke therapeutic support, also more proactive as well. You mentioned that just-in-time messaging, but I guess you can kind of meet people before a problem really sort of manifests and people have to engage in traditional, seeing a consultant, going down the NHS route or whatever else as well.
And that's actually one of our biggest drivers. So in the research that we did in schools and with young people themselves, and what we found was that although we have this already quite high statistic that 20% of young people have a diagnosable mental health disorder, we discovered that actually the rate of people facing mental health challenges but not telling anyone around about it was far higher. And that's the area we're wanting to reach. For all the people that don't tell anyone they're struggling, we want to be able to have them have what I call a compassionate co-pilot in their pocket, essentially. Something that's just there, keeping half an eye, able to kind of go and check in when something looks like it's changing for them.
I love the idea of compassionate co-pilot, and it's probably the million-dollar question, but why do you think mental health is so bad in young people, and why are people still so worried about kind of opening up and talking about it?
Gosh, it is a million-dollar question. I mean, I think, and this is a personal, clinically informed kind of opinion, I suppose, but I think what I see in my clinical practice changing over the last kind of 20 years is this phase of life has always been really challenging, right? It's the time at which developmentally young people have to start to separate from parents and find belonging in a peer group. You and I remember being at secondary school, right? That's tough. It was tough, right? And we want to feel like we belong in a group with other people. So there are challenges to that. And as part of those challenges, we tend to suppress the things that make us feel different. So of course, evolutionarily, it's always going to be the way that young people kind of don't necessarily talk about what's on their mind to their peers. They worry about social judgment. And I think what's happening since the advent of kind of social media and also our smartphones is that social judgment or that polarization seems to come up more and more. So people, I think, are more concerned about social judgment than ever. But also where you and I would have had to have kind of just sat with the discomfort and found other ways of regulating those difficult feelings. We now have phones in our pockets that are so accessible and able to distract us from any of those difficult feelings or difficult thoughts in our heads that we've become habituated into that being the kind of go-to place whenever we're struggling. And the downside of that is that we don't necessarily develop the emotion regulation skills that we need to navigate tricky
I'm glad you brought up social media, because I guess that's something I was otherwise going to ask about. It does seem now, the angles of attack now are just so much greater, and you're not maybe safe when school ends because everyone's then on social media. And aside from social media, I guess there's so many outlets and so many areas of escapism, whether it's online shopping, whether it's online gaming or gambling or whatever other bad behaviors people can engage with, that previously, a young teenager isn't going to be able to go to a gambling shop and buy alcohol and all these other things so easily. There's so many more kind of digital escapisms for people, which, as you mentioned, they're not flexing and developing those emotional regulation and coping muscles or skills, which sounds like that's a kind of a real problem. And it's interesting to understand how your business and platform is tackling that. But talking, more generally about the future of therapeutic care, we know that in our country, the NHS is massively overwhelmed. So I think digital transformation and being able to reach and provide quality care at scale is going to be the solution, or at least part of the solution. Talk to myself and the listeners, if that's okay, a bit about what you see, the role you see AI playing in therapeutic care going forward.
Yeah, it's another really big question and evolving, I think. You're absolutely right. Our access to psychological therapy is actually shrinking, I think. So I think in 2024, the Children's Commissioner noted that it was something like 21.7% of young people in need that were getting access to statutory care, and that's actually come down over the years. So it's a really big issue. I think where AI is exploring and supporting is in the easiest, safest way as it's evolving as a technology, by doing the sort of passive tasks that are taking up clinicians' time. So being able to support note writing and note taking and record keeping, and also, being able to support people in between sessions. So I think clinicians are being able to kind of set certain kind of tasks and homeworks and things to kind of be kept up with, where someone can do that with an app and an AI in between sessions. I think I don't ever see AI replacing therapy. I think there's something really important about being in a physical space with another human being, right? We have these kind of mirror neurons, we have this kind of opportunity to empathize and co-regulate each other as human beings. And I think that's such an important place that will never be replaced by AI. But I suppose where I see and feel inspired about where the future could be is the very early intervention stuff. So this very kind of, can we get in there and support before things become more moderate to severe and enduring mental health conditions? And I think the acceleration of just how great these large language models are developing at pace, I do think that that's possible. We have to think carefully about not creating a dependency, not creating just a companion bot that somebody talks to for hours and hours and hours on end, but that doesn't actually result in behavioural change or kind of change for that person. So we have to be really careful and mindful about how we shape these LLMs, and that's something we're very thoughtful about and within MindPsy. But I think their capacity to be empathic and compassionate and validating is incredible. Like, I'm super impressed.
As cliche as it sounds, it's all about maintaining that balance, isn't it? It's something I'm definitely a cliche I'm guilty of overusing. And I think it's interesting when we look at our primitive kind of needs, and I guess Maslow's hierarchy of needs, some of the things that AI and technology isn't fundamentally going to be able to provide, that empathetic care and, provide that actual, human support that people crave. Really interesting what you were saying about how we're going to measure success with some of these tools, because if we look at engagement purely and people are engaging and treating this chatbot as a friend and they end up ruminating, they've gone past the point of kind of catharsis of opening up and speaking and engaging, and they're in the point of kind of rumination, maybe we've gone backwards. So I think that's such an interesting thing to be mindful of and, keep an eye on as we're kind of using AI and technology in care. You've spoken so much about, the mission, and such a powerful mission that you've got at the business, your views on how AI and technology in general can improve and enhance therapeutic care. I'd love to kind of turn back onto MindPsy, the business, and unpack a little bit about your transition from clinical research, clinical care, to a founder and CEO, because I'm sure that wasn't a seamless and easy transition. So I'd love to sort of understand a little bit more about that transition, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Where do I start? I suppose I think those traits have actually always been there. I think I've always been slightly square peg round hole in terms of clinical practice. Always been able to kind of see where the efficiencies can be made and trying to evolve services in that direction. Yeah, but not, I think on a very basic and grounded level, I've been raising 3 children. My eldest is 5, and the NHS is a beautiful place that will always have my heart in terms of the value that it provides and its mission, and also, yeah, just the stability as well that it provides its staff. So I think for much of my kind of transition, the NHS was the right place to be for me at that time on the mission that I was doing. My kids are kind of grown up now, and I got to a point a couple of years ago where I'd been doing a lot in terms of trying to train and develop new workforces that were earlier intervention, that was really aligned to my kind of passion. But then coming to the realization that the rate of decline is still outstripping how many human people we can match with it. So I suppose I got to that point of kind of going, I can either sit here and feel really aggrieved about it and frustrated, or I can do something about it, basically. And I had to just have that conversation with myself and take the leap, I suppose. But you're right, it's not an easy transition. I've been brilliantly supported. I was fortunate to get onto the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme, which is an incubator for NHS clinicians and providers who have great innovations that can help the NHS in their efficiency, but also in their kind of clinical provision. And it's led by a fantastic team. I mean, it was a fantastic year, basically, both in terms of building a network, because that's so important and something I didn't have as a clinical founder, but also learning and embracing that side and skill set, I suppose. And then, yeah, it's been one thing after another. We were really fortunate to get backing from Innovate UK, who recognised the value of what we were building. And then it's been just a massive learning curve, lots of mistakes along the way.
That's brilliant, and I guess fantastic testament to the product, the solution you're building, how worthwhile and how impactful it's going to be, that you've got this backing, you managed to get into the incubator program. So that's absolutely brilliant. I'm so chuffed about that. While you've been going through the incubator program and you've managed to get this backing, all these fantastic successes and validation, much needed early days as a founder, what have been some of the key challenges that you've overcome as a founder, stepping into this role where you're maybe spinning all these plates?
Yeah. So I think if I'm going to pull one big overarching challenge, which is something I'm still evolving, as a clinical psychologist and as an NHS worker, you are kind of raised with humility and humbleness. And that is a different skill set than being a salesperson and raising finance and coming in really confidently and going, this is a fantastic opportunity that you want to put some money behind. And so it's just a very different mindset shift. And from being a sort of very impact driven, like, clinician to a very still profit with purpose ultimately, and being able to not feel like it's an ask, but still go out with the mentality of, actually, this is an incredible opportunity to invest in or to partner with. So sales and marketing, I suppose, is the whole selling yourself, is that extra challenge, I think.
So you secured backing, which is fantastic validation of yourself as a founder, but also of the platform. So where do you see the business in 3 to 5 years? What's the ultimate goal?
So 3 to 5 years. So I mean, as an overarching kind of journey, the first goal is to build the number of users on the platform, because that gives us this incredible data set from which we can start to understand the nuance of our human behavior and what are the sort of things that we can see in an aggregated way, that are challenges and situations and behaviors associated with our mental health. So from the journey from kind of building a platform that is in as many people's hands as possible and supporting them with protecting their mental health, through to starting to partner clinically and get into the pathway in the NHS with private insurers to be able to help do that early intervention work that's so needed and such a bottleneck, I think, for our clinical partners. And then in 5 years' time, we'd already be, wanting to be in the US. Is a much bigger market. This is a global product. We have built it not just with westernized models in mind. There are 422 million young people out there in need of support, and we're absolutely gunning for that.
Well, sounds like you got your work cut out. A lot to be doing over the next 3 to 5 years, and I, for one, am really excited to kind of track and follow your progress and support where I can in the next 3 to 5 years. As sort of a closing thought, I've learned so much and taken so much away from this conversation. So thank you for sharing. As a kind of closing thought, is there anything you wanted to leave with the listeners? Anywhere you wanted to kind of signpost people if they wanted to reach out and engage or drop you a follow?
So we're currently raising. So if anybody this has resonated and actually you really want to explore the opportunity to have a massive impact, but also a great investment, then please do drop me a line. We're also looking at our kind of brand and corporate partners as well, because we really want to, as they say, nurture this community, this whole sense that actually it takes all of us to turn this challenge around. And I think for young people, any young person watching this, just know that your mental health it's for all of us. All of us have chapters that are more difficult than others, and struggles are really normal, but getting support and for that is really super important. So tell someone, reach out, or come and join us.
Wow. Such a powerful and impactful mission. And, I've really enjoyed, as I mentioned, learning a bit more about your story and learning a bit more about the great work you're doing and plan to expand over the next 3 to 5 years. Thank you very much for your contribution today, Dr. Williams. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've taken a lot away from it, and I hope the listeners have too. So I appreciate them for tuning in. And thanks again.
Thanks, David.